When the Apostle Paul wrote his letters to early Christian communities, he had no idea he was writing the Bible. To him, Scripture meant one thing: the Jewish text he'd studied his whole life. The letters he was sending, just correspondence, practical advice, theological arguments for specific communities. So how did personal letters become sacred scripture? And more importantly, who decided which letters made the cut and which ones didn't? The answer lies in understanding two words that sound similar but mean very different things: scripture and canon. These terms get used interchangeably, but they describe distinct concepts. Getting them right changes how you read ancient texts and understand religious authority. Let's start with scripture. Scripture means any writing a community considers sacred, holy, or authoritative. The key word here is community. What counts as scripture depends entirely on who's doing the counting. One group's sacred text might be another group's interesting historical document. Scripture can also be expansive. A community might have many sacred writings without clear boundaries, texts they revere, read in worship, and treat as spiritually significant. There's no requirement for a definitive list. Canon works differently. Canon means a specific, closed, bounded list of texts officially recognized as authoritative. The word comes from the Greek canon, meaning a measuring rod or ruler. I think of it as the standard against which other texts get measured. The measuring rod metaphor matters. A canon has an inside and an outside. Some texts make the list, others don't. Once closed, the boundary holds. This distinction between broad sacred status and official bounded lists shapes how different religions organize their authoritative texts. Each major religion has its own canonical structure, and these structures look remarkably different from one another. Let's see. Consider the three major monotheistic traditions. Islam has the Quran, a single text with clear boundaries. Judaism has the Hebrew Bible, organized into Torah, prophets, and writings, 24 books closed by the early centuries of the Common Era. Christianity has the Hebrew Bible plus the New Testament, 66 books in Protestant traditions, more in Catholic and Orthodox traditions, finalized over centuries. Same concept of canon, different contents, different structures. The Quran's singularity contrasts sharply with Christianity's two-testament structure. Judaism's three-part division reflects different levels of authority within its canon. Each tradition drew its boundaries through distinct historical processes. Here's where confusion enters. Modern English uses canon metaphorically: the Shakespeare canon, the Western literary canon, the film canon. But this usage misses what makes religious canon distinctive. Literary canons have no official religious body declaring closure, no binding authority. The Western literary canon shifts constantly, adding Toni Morrison, reconsidering Hemingway, debating who belongs. Religious canons, in principle, don't shift. The 27 books of the New Testament remain 27. The boundary holds. When someone says canonical literature, they mean important works. That's not what canon originally meant. Now for the revelation that changes how you read the New Testament. The authors of these texts didn't know they were writing scripture. Paul composed letters to specific churches addressing specific problems. The gospel writers recorded accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. Every time the word scripture appears in the New Testament, with possibly one exception, it refers to Jewish scripture. When Paul writes scripture says, he means the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, not his own letters. He's quoting texts he considers authoritative, not creating new ones. The recognition of his letters as scripture came later. This point deserves emphasis. Open any New Testament letter, find a phrase like "as scripture says" or "it is written." The author is pointing backward to Jewish texts, not forward to Christian ones. Paul didn't think his correspondence to Corinth would sit alongside Isaiah. The Gospel of Mark didn't arrive with a label reading New Testament Book 2. These texts gained scriptural status through community use over generations, read in worship, quoted as authoritative, eventually recognized as sacred. Then came the formal lists. Canonization, the process of official recognition, happened gradually. Communities used certain texts. Those texts gained authority through repeated use. Eventually, church authorities formalized lists declaring which books belonged. The New Testament canon wasn't handed down complete from heaven. It emerged through centuries of discernment, debate, and decision. Some books made early lists and stayed. Others appeared on some lists, but not others. The boundaries we know today represent the end of a long conversation. Why does this distinction matter? When you hear debates about lost books of the Bible or what should be in the Bible, you now have the framework. Scripture concerns sacred status, what a community treats as holy. Canon concerns official boundaries, what made the authoritative list. Now, these categories overlap but aren't identical. Early Christians considered many texts sacred that never made the canon. Understanding this helps you read ancient texts accurately. When Paul quotes scripture, you know he means the Hebrew Bible. When scholars discuss canonical versus non-canonical gospels, they're talking about which texts made the official list, not necessarily which texts some early Christians considered sacred. The next time you encounter these terms, ask sacred status or official list, related but not the same.